Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
Music from Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine today. Joe, that sounds like a holiday song. What are we listening to?
Bob, good afternoon from Lviv. Yes, it is a holiday song, which it's in so many ways, being in Ukraine is like being in a world apart from the modern world that we know in the West. And even though it is January 10th today, you still hear these songs of the Christmas season throughout this month. And I've realized is that, everywhere you go, there's people are still, it feels like it would in Chicago in mid-December here. And as you hear these songs and rituals, I've realized that for Ukrainians, especially here in Western Ukraine, where the Soviets were not able to destroy religion as they did in Central and Eastern Ukraine and as they did in Russia, you see that the tradition is not something that people watch. It's something that people live. They know the words to the songs. They have the special feast with sort of almost like with the rubrics of something like a Shabbat, and it's something that is that people participate in. You don't just watch films or listen to other people sing the songs of the season, but you actually do it yourself. And this tradition, I've realized, binds Ukrainians both vertically, sort of with history and with their ancient roots, but then also horizontally with the people around you. And I think, as I look at, compared to life in the West and, not just in the United States, but also in Europe, where so much of the tradition has been lost. And I think you think of the immigrants who left the U.S., they left the U.S. exactly because they were trying to, for many of them, they were escaping poverty and other things. But a lot of the roots of that poverty were the wars of Europe, going back for hundreds of years. Wars or oppression. You think of the Irish leaving because of the potato famine. But people were leaving to get away from exactly what we see right now, this type of war. But in the process, after you live in the States for a couple of generations, you begin to lose your culture. And then, of course, you have the people who brought over as slaves, and they were torn away from their roots. And so America, while it is, the idea is freedom, there's a fundamental rootlessness, and Ukraine really has these roots are very strong here, and even in a way that you don't see in much of Europe. And I think part of that is, in some ways, maybe the one of the few positive things that came sort of out of the bad of the Soviet time. Ukraine was sort of in a time capsule and sort of protected from some of the excitement of the mid 20th century, where people threw away their traditions. And so Russia doesn't have the traditions that you have in Ukraine. This is something that Putin, he tries to, especially when he's trying to speak to sort of like conservatives in America. He's saying Russia is a great keeper of tradition. But everything I hear, in Russia, people don't even celebrate Christmas; they celebrate New Year's. And so Ukraine really is this repository of tradition, but in a way that's very active and the people live. And even in these songs, like we were just listening to, which is about the birth of Christ, they repeat the same phrases over and over. And that's sort of instilling an idea in your soul. But as I was thinking about this, I was just running it's a little warmer today. It's 22 degrees. And I was running in the snow. And even though there's a great difference between like the focus on tradition here and sort of the lack of tradition in America, there's a great commonality in this spirit of freedom, and that that's America is an idea of liberty, back to our very beginning, and Ukraine really is that idea as well. And I was speaking with an officer, a senior officer in the Ukrainian military, who's also a philosopher, and he said, we are Ukrainian citizens, but it's not about blood; it's about an idea. And this idea, he says, part of it comes from the agricultural roots, from living in what you could call the wild east instead of the wild west, but these expansive fields of the steppes and then the wild mountains. but the the idea of this country has always been to be free, and that's, if you think of this war, people, you say Russia versus Ukraine, but really it's, the idea of Russia has been the idea of the czar, the totalitarian idea, the one person who controls it all. And Ukraine is the complete opposite. It's people who want to live in freedom together, which is made possible by these traditions that bring them together. So they're not isolated, because when you're isolated, that freedom starts to disappear. And I think this is sometimes what I see, in America, where you don't know your neighbors, and you sort of you become disconnected from your society, from self-governance. But when you're sort of, in a sense, in a nice way, forced to communicate with each other, even through holiday rituals, it actually makes self-governance possible in a way. And so I think Ukraine, there's much to explore about this, but I think this is something that gets very much missed, certainly in most of the reporting about this country, because it's so unusual to what we're used to, not just in the U.S., but in Europe.
Yeah, and I love it when you kind of give us a slice of life there, about the people, the places, and I keep thinking, I hope all the beautiful buildings aren't ruined, because you've made it seem like such a wonderful place to visit. And as you know, I have roots there. I'd love to be able to go there on a vacation someday. We can only hope, can't we?
Yeah, this is, I think, part of Russia's project. I mean, this happened during the Soviet times. In many cities throughout Ukraine, the old buildings were destroyed, and the ideological buildings, they shoved people into those Soviet 10-story tall tower blocks, and what that does is it removes the possibility of having common spaces to gather. It removes sort of something beautiful for people to aspire to, and it makes them sort of subservient to the state. And you can certainly see that in eastern Ukraine. In fact, Lviv, a lot of the architecture was preserved here. The Soviets would use Lviv whenever they needed to film, when they were making films and they wanted to pretend that the film was in Italy. They used Lviv. And so a lot of Lviv was preserved. But this is, and I think if you look at the city of Kharkiv, where, which had been recovering so much the past 8 months, from February until right before New Year's, because there were fewer Russian attacks. And that city, it's more of a modern city, but it's clean, the beautiful buildings, everything was coming back to life. And now in the past, week and a half, it's looking like a wasteland. And I think in some ways, what Putin and the Russians are, I think there's a jealousy there, but trying to erase the idea that such a community ever existed. Because for some reason, the people who are really free and build beautiful things are a threat to those angry people who the main thing is power. And I think of this as yeah, it's, and I was just walking by in the old Jewish quarter of Lviv, and you can see the ruins of the synagogue that was destroyed by the Nazis. This was the biggest Jewish city in Europe before the Holocaust, and you see the same thing that Hitler sought to. He tried and failed ultimately, but sought to erase any idea of the Jewish people and of their culture and identity. And you see that here. There's not many Jews left in Lviv, and you can see the ruins still of that carnage. And now we're once again facing the same kind of threat.
When you sent us music today, it reminded me of the post that you put up a couple of weeks ago. Let me just read it here. Fortunately, there are indeed helpful people outside of Ukraine. A friend from Sweden, a kingdom at peace, though surely on edge because of Russia, helpfully sent Bruce Springsteen's My City of Ruins, which I've had on repeat while working through the night, writing, raising money for drones, planning how we will stop the Kremlin. And part of the lyrics from Springsteen, now the sweet bells of mercy drift through the evening trees, come on and rise up. Very meaningful, and I know it was to you, Joseph.
Indeed, and in that song specifically, Springsteen was singing about Asbury Park, his hometown, I think, which had been ravaged sort of by sort of modern problems, and in some ways by the breakdown of tradition. But he was singing about how it was coming back to life in a beautiful way, and so it is a song of hope. And yeah, we need all these little encouragements and even as these, I mean, the most heartbreaking thing, I think, is if you look at places like Bakhmut and Mariupol, they've been wiped off the map, as though a nuclear bomb had hit. Those places are pretty much forever removed. But for the places that are still here, there's great hope. And if, with all these good people around the world helping, and especially now working to persuade, the powerful people in Washington, which is the place that is capable of sending the weapons to end this. And the New York Post actually has a great story today. It was commissioned by an editor there, Kelly Jane Torrance. She came to Ukraine very bravely. She came with me to Kharkiv. So she's seen the reality here. And there's the story is Europe is sending Ukraine more money than the U.S., but only the U.S. can send the weapons Ukraine needs, by Dalibor Rohak. So if you get the chance, I highly recommend that story at NewYorkPost.com.
We hope for better times. Appreciate the reporting, as always, and the history lesson. We'll talk tomorrow, Joseph.
Thank you, Bob. Until tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що сказав?
Well, which side are you on? На чиїй ти стороні? Come on now. Oh, which side are you on? На чиїй ти стороні?